Hello, everyone. This is Kyla from Hidden Gems Literary Emporium, your family owned nonprofit community bookstore. And we have a very special guest today, the author of this book, Mind, that is on display and available here at Hidden Gems by Miss Usha Sita Sundaram. Sundaram.
You said that perfectly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. And so let's begin by you briefly introducing yourself, telling us the meaning of your beautiful name, and telling us the inspiration behind writing this book.
Okay. So my my journey to be where I am now was certainly not an overnight one. I was born in St. Louis. I lived in Missouri. Actually lived in Missouri for 18 years, and then I came out to California, and I went to school in California. I actually studied to be a genetic counselor. Um, in college, I was a literature major, so I was really interested in like writing and reading, but I always kind of wanted to help people too. And, I was always looking for that balance. And it wasn't until I had my own children that I realized that all my efforts to live a good life really were now being tested. I knew that I was a good person. I think many of us try to live good lives. We do the best that we can. Um, but then we get a challenge that we're not able to surmount. And being a mother is one of the greatest gifts that has ever been given to me, but it has actually been one of my greatest challenges too. So my first son, I have two boys, and this is kind of a long story to tell you about my book and how I started writing. But my first son, the moment he was born, I knew he had something. And I was in genetics. And so I thought maybe you're just being paranoid, but I felt like the moment I looked at him, this child has some special need, but I didn't know what it was. And nobody really believed me because he looked so normal and he developed normally. But when he was around 2, he, just started having like raging tantrums, and just out of the blue, just emotional issues that I felt I had no understanding of. And I started this, and he was really, raged against me, raged against his brother. And, we were giving him like the most gentle home, I loved him so much. And so it was really hard for me. I'd go to bed weeping, that I was a failure as a mother because I couldn't settle my son. And and this, when he was about 2.5, I decided I need to find my own path, because I need to be a better mother for him. Like, you almost need to rise to the occasion for your child. Like you can be a perfect person professionally or with your friends or your family, but then you as a mother or there's some element that's missing. So I began meditation, and I began yoga, and I began all these things. I was trying all these different things, and it took, honestly, it took some years before I felt like I made progress. But what ended up happening is I realized that all I needed to do was to have patience with myself, because the path of growth with my child was actually a single path, and we were really like on it together. And so I started diaries, actually. Mind wasn't it wasn't an inspiration to write a book about my spiritual path. I was writing a diary about my hardship, with my own dissatisfaction with myself, and that's really what I learned over time, that I wasn't approaching him with the correct perspective. I was wanting him to, I wanted to understand him, but I also wanted him to, if we were in public, to behave in public, because I had some conditioned norms, like if we're at a restaurant, he shouldn't be doing certain things. And what ended up happening was his condition did finally show itself. And he's got like a processing disorder. He has a processing condition. he overstimulates. He doesn't have autism in any traditional sense. Goes to regular school, he does the usual thing, but he's really sensitive to light and sound, and he can be triggered, and it can really it causes emotional breakdowns. As he's gotten older, he's 16 now, he's very different, he's much more in control. But I began when he was 2. So this was a 14-year path, with him. And so Mind is actually a compilation of 10 diaries that I wrote over a period of time with him. And the progress that I made through meditation was just this quiet space of acceptance. And as I began to accept myself, I began to accept my child, and I began to accept all these different areas of my life. And so Mind was really birthed out of this diary that I was writing. When you empty yourself on a page, it allows your mind to space, you have more space. So that was really how I got started. And I have so much to thank my son for, because in his difficulties that became mine, I started writing and I found my own way, which ultimately has helped him. So the two of us are, like we're like that little infinity sign, we just go back and forth with each other. So that's just to give you a sense of where I am, with my writing. My name, is, when I grew up in St. Louis, my name Usha Sita, was so different. And, there's a lot of racism in the 70s and 80s in St. Louis. And it wasn't a name I was proud of, and I struggled a lot. I went to a Catholic school. It was, almost all white. I think there were few Indian sort of background Asians, in the school. And, fitting in was about, if you didn't have blonde hair, if you didn't have white skin, it was about, you better be funny, or you better have a nice house, where we can have all our friends over. And so there was a lot of pressure, a lot of stress in St. Louis. And it really took getting older and moving away. When I moved to California, I mean, I wish I could say I found myself in St. Louis. I didn't. I really had to get some distance to understand that we are individual people, and we have every right to accept any component of our heritage. We also have a right to say, this part of my heritage isn't who I am. We can be born in America, and we can pick and choose who we are. That's the freedom that we have in this country. And so when I got to California, I began to look at myself more closely. And my name, though, I've really kind of grown to see the truth of my name, in many ways. I was not a perfect person. My middle name is Sita, which is the goddess, of purity, of, she was actually known for never telling a lie. She was just a very virtuous person. And, for sure, when I was in my teenage years, I was very raucous and rebellious. And, I would routinely lie to my mother, if I felt I needed to. And that's certainly not something I'm proud of. And I've, when I hit 18, I actually had an experience when my mother, almost passed away. And that was like a real turning point for me. And I apologized to my mother, and my mother is just such a spiritual person herself, and so she in her forgiveness of me, I've really moved on. I'm a very honest person, but I'm the first to admit, my teenage years were difficult because of where I lived and trying to fit in. And Usha just means, like first light. It means the dawn of the morning. So I've come to embrace my name over time.
And as a child, did you always know what the meaning of your name?
My mother did tell me the meaning of my name when I was a child. I do remember that. But I didn't really know the story of Sita and Rama, which is an incredible story. It's the Ramayana, which I don't know if you've read that, but it's this beautiful story of Rama defeating the devil, and Sita accompanying him on this journey. So I didn't read that until I was actually much older, when I was reading a child's story, a child's version of that story to my own children. And I realized kind of the depth of the name Sita.
One reason why we love doing these interviews is because it allows the reader to get a personal account from the author on why they wrote the book, the background behind it. And I'm not surprised that you said that this book is actually a compilation of inserts from your diary, right?
Yes.
Yes. And as I was reading it, it felt like that. It just felt very personal. I was just thinking to myself, like, this is very poetic. This seems as though this came from straight from her mind and onto the page, as you said. And so I'm chuckling to myself as you said that, because I was thinking that as I was reading the book.
This book, when I look back at this book, it was one of my first books, but it's also one of the most undiluted. As I started writing more, I started thinking more about who else is going to read this. When I wrote Mind, it was really a pure expression of thought, and it felt like the ego, which is this part of us that prevents us from knowing our true selves, because the ego is, it's this part of the human existence which is very normal, but it reacts, it has a reactive component. And when you start meditating, or you do yoga, or whatever spiritual practice it is that helps you step to the side of that reactive part, you're actually stepping to the side of your ego. And it's very interesting because you can feel the distance between the two, and you can decide, how do I want to align myself? And I'm not going to say in every moment, because that is a little bit difficult for the human person who's doing 100 things with their kids. You're not always like, who do I want to be in this moment? But in the beginning of a day, you can remind yourself, I want to align with that part that is more calm, and the decisions I make and the way I speak is from that part of me. And when I first learned that part was within me, as it is within all people, I was so blown away by it, and I was in awe of it. It felt like it wasn't me. And the way I wrote was with such gratitude. And you'll see a lot of capitals in my books, and it's because it felt like God. It wasn't like I felt like God, but I felt like I'd reached what God was. And my parents, because they were kind of island born people, Malaysia and Sri Lanka, they were very accepting of each other's upbringings around religion, and they didn't put religion on us. They told us, be free spirits, believe whatever you want to believe in God, don't believe in God, talk to us, question God. And so I grew up thinking there's probably God, but I don't know what it is. And when I started doing my own practice, which, I think community religion is so beautiful. And, I went to Catholic school. I mean, I was kind of an honorary Catholic in a way, but when I started my own solitudinal practice, it's something I think is so good to do, because you can find your own self in that. Sometimes with our community practices, it's so nice because you can bond with your congregation. But when you do a lone practice, you're really coming to terms with your own self. And I write a lot about that. What comes up in our mind, we're taught that if we meditate, it should be silence, it should be, that isn't how it works. What comes into your mind is what you must focus on. It means those are the remnants within you that have not you haven't found acceptance with them. And as much as you try to bury them or kind of, wind them away, breeze them away, they will keep coming back, and we will react from those memories sometimes, even without meaning to. And that's the ego. The ego can be something that is very selfish, certainly, but sometimes it can be that reactive part that we don't even mean to react in a way, and we suddenly say, God, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I hadn't said it like that. That comes from sometimes these memories that are buried very deeply. So whatever comes, even if you do a 2-minute meditation practice, and in that 2 minutes, some memory comes into your mind, you've been given insight of something that you can work on, even just in a small way, but meditation is actually, it's a lifetime practice. And, it's anyway, mind is a lot of poetry. So, because I was so grateful and I didn't have the vocabulary to express my gratitude of the changing mind, so a lot of it is poetry.
And I'm so glad that you said that, because that is a perfect segue. I was just about to bring up the poetry in the book. And there's so much beautiful poetry in the book. I just flipped open to 221, and I'm just going to read this little poem. It's called Speak to Me. Speak to me of being free. It is the meadow gold. It is the newly old. It is the earthly hues of green, the life in between, the yonder way found today. Walk with me through the trees, the forest world, if you please. Sunbeams through my rainy nights, dries the tears from all the lives. Hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that poem, Speak to Me?
Oh, yes. So when you spiritually practice, I almost like I when I hear that, when I heard that poem, because I wrote it a while ago, but it reminds me of the purity of practice when you first begin and you first learn that there are these different elements to our mind and even to our body, what our own body can achieve. Like if you go into a yoga class versus what you can do in your room when there's no audience and there's nobody there but and you're willing to take a few more chances and you're willing to fail because there's no, humiliation in that, sometimes you reach these epiphanies. And Speak to Me is about the walk within our own mind and to our own soul, and that it's dreamlike, and whether you are, with someone who supports your path or not, you're never alone. And so Speak to Me is there's a God element that you'll certainly find through meditation, and even these practices like yoga and martial arts, but even walking or biking, you can find meditation in almost anything that stills our mind, that is meditation. But there's a God element in all of us, and even if for a moment, if you have a good experience with someone like I'm having with you, I mean, we're part of each other's journey, even for this brief moment. But the poetry, a lot of my poetry is song. And, when I'm not a musician, I wish I was, I play the piano, but I do sing, and many of my poems are actually lyrics that I have never put to music because I just don't know. I just haven't gotten there yet. But a lot of it is this kind of sing-songy poetry. There's a chapter in the book called Sacred Child, and it's poetry for the boys, for my kids that I wrote. And they were really intended to be like lullabies. But I feel like so much of spirituality, at least the way I was taught, was very austere. You were supposed to be very um, proper, when you thought about God, and there's nothing at all wrong with that, but what I've learned is you can be a very godly person, swimming in the pool with your child, or, wearing a swimsuit. I mean, like, that's the United States that comes into a lot of it is, I think that every culture brings its own sort of brand, to spirituality. And I think it's in the United States, one of the greatest joys is that we have the freedom to practice always on the right side of the fence, though. Like, you can make mistakes for sure, but we're meant to learn from them. And, we're meant to follow our conscience, which is really almost, in my mind, becomes the soul speaking. It's really, conscience is an incredible guide, um, but yeah, I feel like that poem it's really the melody, of the writing.
And when you say the poem out loud, you can almost feel the melody of it. And I have to say this because this is the second time I flipped open to this page, and the poem is in this section called Waken in Time. How did you come up with that title for this section of poetry?
Waken in Time. So I write a lot about when you may come across this in the book. I write about time with like a lowercase or with an uppercase. I feel that time is beyond the human thinking clock, like what we look at and everything. So that is what I realized in my continued practice, which began in my kitchen. It began with the kids, needing breakfast. It began with them. I mean, they are like the two little, babies on the back. This journey was never alone, to be honest with you. I learned through them. But waken in time means where it's 3 o'clock, where you learn the truth of yourself. It's like the third eye opening, when you learn that you are not the person that you thought you were. And the person that I thought I was a good person, like I said, but what I realized was that there are dimensions to each of us that are beyond the tangible. You may not be able to touch it at first, but you can feel it. You can feel a depth. It's almost like where you feel kind of excited about something, like, or if you hear a teacher speaking, or you read something in a book and it resonates with you as truth, sometimes it's like that. You get a feeling without the words. And as you keep going, you may actually stumble a little bit in that, because you feel like, how do I now pursue that? Or how do I make that more real? And it may not be the time to do that. So time has its own component. It means it has to almost align with like a universal quality of rightness. So it's more than just me wanting to do something. It's more, what is the moment of fruition? And that may not be when you open your eyes or when you step outside. But I remember one waken in time was where I was, I would do meditation, and I would open my eyes and think, I just feel like drawing something pink. Or, like, I would have like this sort of bizarre thought, and it wouldn't leave me. And then I would finally just go, and I would get like a canvas and a bunch of pastels, and I would just start drawing in one color, because I never considered myself an artist. My sister's was like the artist in our house. Everyone kind of got labeled, with something. And as I did more and more, I realized, no, there is art. There is so much that is within us. So waken for me was just the realization that I am more than I was when I began.
I love that explanation. Thank you for saying that. Would you say that there is one either poem or section in this book that you feel would resonate with readers the most, or that you feel is your favorite part of this book?
When I think back on how I began and how difficult it was for me, I don't know, everyone has their own way, based on how they're brought up, based on their childhood experiences. Some of us have haunting memories from childhood. Some of us have the most beautiful, or a mix of the two. And I think that we just carry that with us. And, whatever propels a person to begin is good. And that's always coming from a depth of self. If you ever feel suddenly the need to begin yoga or to begin meditation, that is a calling, and you can ignore it as much as you like, but it'll keep coming to you, until you do it. And it's not a failure to ignore it. Again, you're waiting for that moment of fruition will be there. But in mind, I would say, for any reader who doesn't know me, I would, as a reader myself, I began as a reader. Who is this person, and why should I believe them? And why are you different? Or why, do I care about your path? Is it going to help me in some way? And it's fine to have those questions. That is absolutely fine. Anyone who claims to have reached a level of understanding or of spirituality or of knowledge, whatever it may be, they should be questioned and they should be tested. I think that is absolutely right. But my very first essay about how I began, where it started for me, it's the very first page of mine. I go back and I read that, and I remember the moment that I felt the presence of God. And I would say that I would want any reader who picked up my book to begin there, to know where I began and how I began, and that I began like a person like you, a mother with children, with a job, trying to make your life in this country that requires money, and how to step back from that and still be as honest to yourself as you can be. It's very challenging in our country. As much as we have freedom, money holds us, because we got to pay our bills and we have to do all of that.
I paused to briefly read because I just flipped open to um I flipped open to two poems that both resonate with exactly what you just said. And I think I'm going to read this one. So it's called Invincible Mind. Invincible mind, the treacherous lower domain retreats. Witness its submission. Warm rain cleanses the misty mind. Cloudy strands swept away. Remnants of time. Dewy drops, heart tears.
Heart tears. It could be either, but it means heart cries.
Okay. Heart tears, fears captive. Through the one life sings its freedom song of survival. And you were just talking about people in this country and how we are all trying to sing our freedom song of survival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is beautiful. Um, the delusion. Ooh, let's talk about the delusion. And she chuckles. I'm just flipping through, and I love to just flip as I'm doing these interviews.
Yes.
But also, when readers come in, they're trying to decide on a book, and we always tell them just flip through, and you'll be surprised at what
Over time, I actually stopped putting page numbers in my books. I wanted people just to flip, because my books are there is no, I don't write from point A to point Z. What I tried to do was redefine spiritual terms like for our country, like what we go through, nirvana and prana and karma and, the illusion and cosmic destiny, all these terms, and so, yes. So you can read The Delusion, or we can talk about that.
Ooh. And then I closed it and I flipped to truth. What did it say? Truth, resignation. Oh yeah. Truth, resignation. Ooh. Ooh. And our son's name is Truth.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love this.
Yes. We wanted to, all of our children will have the first name of a virtue because we want them to, grow,
It's
live.
wonderful.
And so Truth was first, and our first daughter will be named Wisdom. And if we have
Amazing.
another boy first, he'll be named Honor. And so we have a whole bunch of names picked out because we want to have a large family. But
Oh, I
Truth
love it.
Okay, and then she has a section called Truthisms of Being. Okay, remember thy way, waken in time, sacred child. Okay, I'm trying to find disillusion now. Let me see. Oh, you have a poem called Truth. Can I read it really quick?
Of course.
Okay. For anyone who's going to be watching this video, it's on page 180. Truth. Truth.
I hope this is a good one and not about the ego. I write
No,
write a lot about the ego.
Know about truth. Truth lies within the knowing. Right? He doesn't want to come over here. I love these. Oh, and there's truth. Where is disillusion? What page? Let me see. Here it is. Hi, Truthy. Okay. The delusion. The ego is far from an illusory entity. A delusion, yes. Illusion, no. Calling it this is a far cry from the reality of the life lived. It has an essential purpose and actuality, the transcension, the ascension, the resurrection of the higher self buried in the egoic tomb of past time. The understanding of this already speaks to the depth surfaced. Be at peace in this knowing, already alive within you, the all with a capital A. Knowing was also with a capital, and so is depth for anyone listening. Beginning the climb, the walk, the journey may seem daunting, too arduous to pursue. The lower self will go to great lengths to keep you satisfied in its misdeeds, its mistruths. Wherever you reside in this moment, whatever plane of spirituality upon which you stand, allow it not to anchor you. Release the tethers always. The inward inquiry brings forth the higher knowledge. It is critical to the cessation of self-criticism. Find the courage to hear the judgments of the lower self. Listen to it. Speak as you sit quietly. There is nothing more to do. As a spiritual practice, allowing of the ego to reveal itself during meditation simply reduces it over time. Beneath its rantings, the greater transformation is taking place. The space of the allowing widens. You deepen. It is a sublime effect. There are a lot of things that you write in the book that just make you go, it's like you read, then you pause and you think. Then you flip and you read and you pause and you think. So do you want to talk a little bit about that short, I'll call it essay?
Yes. So my brother it brings my brother to mind. I have two brothers and a sister. One of my brothers is really also very interested in meditation and understanding self, but we're very different, and we've had very different experiences. And he talks about the illusion, and there's a kind of a, a way of saying, life is all an illusion, right? Like, there's so much more beyond us. But I never really got that. But life is not an illusion for me. Like, I am so rooted in my life and my situation and my children and what goes on. So I never understood that. And so illusion means, it's not there. It's something that is like a configuration of the mind. Of the delusion is actually a false belief. So that's why I was trying to kind of put those two together. Delusion, yes, to believe that we are like a victim, of our suffering. When I went through cancer, I wrote a book on cancer, which is, a very different take on cancer from a spiritual perspective. I really wrote from the point of suffering and how you transcend suffering, not with the, sunny rays, beaming through, but how you transcend it out of duty, for your children. And that was like the best I could do. But, when you go through cancer, I mean, that's certainly not an illusion, but you can say, oh, well, it's so unfair that I was 44 and I got cancer, and, why me and nobody else? And you can live in that, within that pain, and others will feed you. They'll tell you, we are so sorry that this happened to you. And they're so well-meaning, and you can fill with self-pity. And, it's, on the one hand, it is absolutely okay to acknowledge that happens, that can, when you get diagnosed with cancer, any disease, you have every right to say, why me? And this feels unfair. I mean, those initial questions are so important. It's similar to quieting your mind and letting and hearing your thoughts. It's very similar to that. If you don't allow that speech, sometimes we try so hard to say the right thing. People now know me as like a spiritual writer, and they almost expect me to speak in a certain way, because spiritual writers speak in a certain way. I don't do that. I'm very true to who I am from St. Louis, but, now I'm just that girl grown up with a different perspective. And I think all of us have these opportunities. We have these moments, these critical crossroads during our life where we have the choice what path to follow. Do I want to take the higher path, which is that of acceptance, but not through passivity? We can accept, but it's not necessarily like, oh, I have cancer, and, I'm going to live now this, from a platform of disease. And we can do that in a good way, but it may not address the underlying festering that's within us. And so you may, on the surface, it's very tricky with ego. You may live from this very virtuous standpoint of, I had cancer, now I'm going to go help other people with cancer. And that's a beautiful thing, and good can come out of it. But what really needs to happen is when you are diagnosed with a disease, and many people in the United States are diagnosed with health conditions because our environment is toxic. It can be very toxic. And it's not just the pollution, it can be the interactions, the day-to-day interactions can also be very stressful, which can now then have a toxic self-environment, So the goal is to understand, what is it that's really bothering me? If you get a disease, or if, let's say even your child comes home with a bad report card and you feel something, you feel that irritation, or you feel that, that you're upset. Maybe it's out of the context with, the report card, or maybe it surprises you. I feel more angry about my cancer than sad. Whatever the emotion is, it means we're meant to spend time there. And so when I wrote the book Cancer, it is a darker kind of view of acceptance, but it was the way that I pushed myself through. I didn't have a lot of support, just because I wasn't living near my family. My family is very, very good, very sweet. I have a nice, great family, but they weren't available to me, so it was just me and my elementary school children. And it was so difficult. And, the writing of the book really helped me find that silver lining, but it wasn't there to begin with. And, I think that that poem, writing about the delusion, there is a delusion within spirituality, that, you know, we can just, meditate, or we can do yoga and we can reach, you know, these beautiful pinnacles. You may actually see beautiful light during meditation and you feel you've reached a higher level. The trap is that you've got to live it. You've got to take it into your life. You've got to apply it, to your children. It's like a bomb, it's like being given a soothing balm from the universe. But if you keep it on an altar and you worship it, it does nothing. You really have to take it into practice. And I feel like, my life is just practice now. I just try to apply it to all situations.
Thank you for that answer, and just for your time today. One last question. In your plans, do you plan on publishing any other books in the future?
Yes. And I mean, I'll tell you truthfully, Mind was my first book. But I started writing about 10 or 11 years ago. I published Mind and, some time ago, but I didn't know that anybody would care about me and my diary. And, I was so new to this whole path. But I finally decided I'm going to put it out, because if even one person can benefit from my book, because I felt very alone when I began. Meditation can bring up, different questions about ourselves and who we are and how we were raised and everything. And you sometimes wonder, who can I turn to? And not a lot of people may be going through the same experience as you. So I decided I would write just so there would be something for other people. And I wrote very honestly about, everything I went through, because I wanted people to know everything you go through isn't even your final resting point. Your final resting point is when we close our eyes and take our last breath, and even then, there's a beyond, but I have written many other books since then. And, all my books are available in the public library. I really want people to know that you don't have to pay for my books. I feel very much like I wrote for others and for my own self, to clear my mind. And I really want people to know that you can get, if they're not in the library, you can ask for it to be ordered and brought to the library. I had to sell them to get that option of the library. So I put so they are for sale. I do have a website, akashaspiritualfaith.com. That is not where you can purchase anything, but it's where you can read some of my writing. Like, I blog a little bit, and you can get in touch with me if you have questions about something you read, because when you read somebody else's spiritual path, it can be confusing at times, because the vocabulary to describe a metaphysical experience, which is like meditation, for example, may not be the same as somebody else's vocabulary. And if there's a question, or particularly if it triggers any kind of irritation, annoyance, or anger, I'm very open, to any emotions that are raised in, by anybody. And you can always write to me and I will always answer you. So I do have a lot of books, and you'll see all those books there, but they're all spiritual diaries. And so I haven't changed. The only difference is that it's not quite as heavy. I find Mind is it's dense, with spiritual kind of truth. As I went on, I wrote more about just my day-to-day life. How do you, I wrote a book called Child, like, how do you raise a difficult child? How do you raise a child that at times you don't love? Not because you don't love them, but they're so difficult that you feel you don't love them. And it triggers failure as a parent. So I've written a lot about just, money and our struggles, just because they're so real. But that's why we embark, is to try to find that ethereal level of calm and of peace.
Thank you for saying that. And I want to encourage everyone who will be watching this video to go on her website and check out her collection of books, or go to your local library. And of course, come by Hidden Gems Literary Emporium and get your copy of this book, Mind. If you give us a call at 609-361-4331, we would also be happy to ship you a copy to your home. Um, Thank you again, Miss Usha, for your time today. It's been such a lovely conversation with you. And I want to thank you for putting your heart on paper for us all to read. And we always talk about how when you publish a book, or when you create any type of art, it now becomes a part of history. So years and generations down the line, people will be able to read this book and, take all the things away from it that you had to give.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, part of talking about, the book is talking with you. And it's really been, you're one of the easiest people I've ever spoken to. You're so kind, and your children are, and your husband, and your family. It's so, you're fortunate to have each other, because you have so much to give to each other. But thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
And it was my pleasure. And thank you for your kind words. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.